Hey everybody, Gil here with the Sailing Vessel Dream Chaser, and in last week's episode we went ahead and showed how we did a repair on a companionway hatch. We just did a lot of little work. We prepped the mizzen step, we fixed the companionway slide rail, and we showed some of the progress made on the coach house roof as well as priming the decks. So a lot of exciting things going on, and what it reminded me of is we're behind. So a few weeks ago when we were prepping and sanding the boom down, Deb was doing it and she noticed a bad spot. I'll put a link to the video right up here. But during that video she found a spot in the boom that was a little bit rotted or suspect. We love the wooden booms on this boat. It's part of the classic look it has, and in order to maintain them, we've got to do a repair on this. The last thing we want to do is have a weak structure at that part of the rigging. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how you go about, one, identifying that there's a problem, two, determining how large that problem is, how to remove the problem area, how to clean up that area, and how to scarf in a new piece of wood and sand it all smooth so it looks back like it's original again. This is going to be just as strong as the original boom. I think you guys will like the video. If you do, by all means, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to our channel, my wife and I do videos every single week about our lifestyle, living aboard and refitting our classic sailboat. If that's the type of content you think you'd enjoy, do us a favor, go ahead and click on the subscribe button and that little bell icon. That way you'll be notified of any new content. If you think others might enjoy it, please do, share it, post it on social media, and give it a thumbs up. Thanks everybody, let's get to the video. For a little bit of background, when we were sanding the boom, Deb went ahead and found a couple of spots that needed to be repaired. I'll show a little clip here just so you can see where what the overall boom looks like. I realized as I filmed all this, I didn't actually show the whole boom, so this may be helpful. So to get started, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to identify the area where we have a concern. So if you kind of see this, it looks a little bit pitted right here, and this actually looks a little bit moist, which is odd. This was sitting kind of underneath this covered awning, so I'm surprised it looks a little bit wet. But we're going to take this spot right here, and you can kind of see where this has been attached. So this is a box frame format. This is a piece of wood, and then there's a top piece and a bottom piece, and there's probably some blocks in there that sandwich it together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole right here where this pitted piece is in the corner here, one here, one here, and one here. And the idea is to remove this section and put a new one in there. So I don't know how thick the wood is, so what we're going to do is drill into it and kind of keep an eye on it as we go. That was really soft wood, way softer than I would have expected it to be. Yeah, this feels really soft and pithy right here, so I'm going to do the same over here at this section. And what I want to do is get into good wood, so I'm going to go a little further beyond it. I'm going to take this deck a little further to solid wood again. Alright, so now we're just going to kind of come out here to the width we think we need. See, this wood is so soft, what's happening is it's grabbing on the edge of this bit and it's pulling it across. I'm going to certainly be careful to avoid that. So I'm going to try and go real light pressure here and get this to dig in here. I love these things.
I'm going to be in the video too.
Okay. If anyone's watched the channel for a little while, you know how much I like these oscillating tools. Unfortunately, I had one stolen. I just went and grabbed another one. I just buy the little cheap ones. I'll put a link down in the descriptions below. I get them on Amazon. They're about 25 bucks, and they work great. I do use good blades. They cut metal or wood. So let's go ahead and get this started, and we'll start cutting a little bit more here so we can see it. You want to say hi?
Hi.
I got my helper with me. You gonna help today? What you can see here is I got this outlined in about the shape I want. I'm going to grab a small chisel and I'm just going to kind of work up some of these pieces before I start going across the bottom. I don't know what the bottom looks like yet, so I don't want to go too deep. I drilled the holes until they felt a little bit solid. What I'm hoping to do is get through whatever this piece of wood is without going obviously past about halfway.
Beep.
So you can see this piece is coming right out and you can see just how pitted that is. really in rough shape. It's kind of interesting to see this. I'm trying to see the construction here, so I'm going to get the rest of this scooped out of here so we can see what it looks like. So I went ahead and did this first layer, and I can see kind of a smooth edge down there. So I'm going to try and clean up to that edge and then kind of inspect it and see how it looks. There's still a couple of spots here. You might be able to see this. Still a few spots where I need to work on it. Like this is still pithy, and then this feels solid, and then I got to get this piece off. But it's hollow right in here, and I want to see what that is. I suspect it's solid all the way up from the end to here, and then it probably was box format up there. That gives it the strength where the attach point is. So what we're going to do is kind of use some old school carpentry techniques, right? And the idea here is to get this nice and squared off so that I can put a nice square piece of material in its place. So what we've got going on here is it's getting fairly clean, and these little pieces you're seeing here are actually a little bit of the epoxy or whatever gluing material was used between the surfaces as they put this box beam together. So let's get this cleaned up real quick and take a closer look. We're going to kind of do the same thing over here and just clean this up. Let's see if I can show you this here. So this, if you can see that right there, it's still a little pithy looking right in here. See how it looks nice and solid over here, and then right there it doesn't. So I'm going to extend this cut up just a little further to get that repair in better shape. But you can see this is the solid piece, right, that goes from the end of the boom, and you can see where it's solid all the way through, which makes sense. We have a heavy mechanical bonding spot here. We want all the strength there, and then as it gets further up into the boom, it can be hollow, and that's what we're looking at here. So we're going to cut this out a little further, do that repair there. If you recall, I showed from the side where it was kind of soft here. I'm going to lift this up just so you can see the difference. You can actually see this really clearly. There's that spot where it's pithy or soft. You can kind of see it right there. So the good news is I'm a good ½ inch past that. I'm certainly in good wood. That's a great way to scarf it. This is a good area to stop at. So it's now a matter of cutting this out of here. But the inside of this is sort of a U channel, and you can see the edge. This is coat of it. It goes like this and up and around. It's sitting there like this. So it goes up. And I don't know if they removed this section in the middle, right in here. You can kind of see where if I get my finger in there, you can see how it's loose there. But it's, you know, it's pretty thick. I don't know if they did that just to reduce the weight of the overall boom. That could be it. So this is thick. This is more than 3/4 of an inch thick, and I need to make it proud, so I'm going to have to put a 1 inch thick piece in here, and I could thicken some epoxy and just set it in there and give it a little space, which would probably be fine, but I think I want to go with something thicker just to make sure. So this is the other spot on the boom, and this is pretty small. That's under 1 inch in diameter. So I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to see if I can just drill a round hole and plug this as opposed to trying to cut out a square here. So we're going to give that a shot and see what happens. Again, I'm going to try and go really slow here, because if it's pithy, it's going to work its way around, and then I won't be able to get a good plug on it. The good news is this worked pretty well from a plug perspective. I'm going to turn it just so you can see. So I can get my finger all the way in there. We ran that vacuum against it to get any dust or any of the crumbs that went down in the mess. It's amazing. I had McKinley hold the vacuum right up against this, and I put my hands in the other spot like this over that square hole, and I could feel it sucking my fingers down, which is good. It means I don't have any other leaks or openings, even just air coming through, because I was a little bit worried about this section right here. It feels really solid. I have a feeling this just got bumped somewhere, and rather than try and scarf something on the bottom, since this is a major structure, there's no patches on that at all. I'm okay patching these. You know, you can see where this has been scarfed here. You can see a couple of bolt holes here, probably where it was screwed together at one point. I can see a scarf further up this direction as well. So this is going to be a good way to solidify? I don't think that's a word. A good way to solidify or make this more solid. So this is what it looks like kind of close up, and I'm going to show this as I go down it. Put the flash on so you can see it. And here's where you can see the channel of the wood on the top and bottom. Remember, I have it sitting on its side. This is a mating surface, the vertical cut, and another mating surface. So So the good news is I'll be able to get epoxy on this surface, on the bottom surface, bottom, side, all along this bottom surface, and all three of these sides, as well as this mated side. And once we get that in there and clamped, that'll be a good repair, and then we'll sand it all smooth on the top. What I do need to do is see if I can go find a piece of this size wood and figure out what kind of wood it is. I'm not 100% if it's teak or not. Maybe mahogany. Well, it looks like we're going to have to call it quits for the day. I was really hoping we'd be able to finish all of this project in one day. Unfortunately, the piece of wood we removed from the boom was actually a little thicker than I anticipated. I thought it was going to be a 1/2 or 3/4 inch thick, making it a little easier to pick up a piece of replacement wood at a local lumber or hardware store. Unfortunately, it was a full 1 inch thick, and with that, that means that I need to buy something actually thicker than that. I need to probably get 1.25 inches, because once I epoxy and glue it in there, I want it to sit up a little higher than the rest of the boom so I can plane it down and sand it and really have it form with all the rest of the boom and make a good solid joint. I certainly don't want that to be a low spot where I do the repair. So I don't know if anyone's actually bought hardwood, specialty hardwood before like this. I'll kind of share with you a little bit of what I know on this. Typically it's sold by the board foot. So for example, let's just say, and I'm making up these prices, let's just say that a piece of 4-inch wide, 1 inch thick teak would be $40 a board foot. That means for 4 inches wide, 1 foot long by 1 inch thick would cost $40. Specialty lumber like this is sold by the fourths. So for example, if you needed a piece of 1/2 inch stock, 1/2 inch thick, and they had it, it would be labeled as 2/4, 2/4. If you need 1 inch thick, that's going to be labeled as 4/4, and that's equal to the board foot. If you're actually going to, let's just say you need 1.5 inches, that's going to be labeled as 6/4, and obviously 8/4 would be 2 inches thick. But if you were going to buy, let's say 5/4, 1.25 inches, like what I need, assuming that the lumber yard or the specialty wood store has 1.25 inch stock at $40 a board foot, what you're likely going to pay is going to be $50 a board foot. You're essentially paying 125% of the price because you're at 5/4, right, or 1.25 a board foot. It's something good to know, because I will tell you that it's worth shopping around. There are some specialty stores that may not stock 5/4. What they may stock is 2 inches thick, 8/4. And they may charge you for 8/4 and just plane it down to the size you need. Obviously, that's something you want to know and be aware of, because that means you're essentially paying $80 a board foot for that 8/4 then. And it's a significantly higher cost. So now what I have to do is I've got to reach out to that lumber yard, Riverside Lumber, where I bought my marine grade plywood, see if they have it. There's also a place not too far from me called Arcadia Specialty Hardwoods. I know in the past when I've asked, they didn't typically stock teak, but I think they did stock mahogany. So I have a small sample piece that I pulled out of there, and I'll bring it up there and see if they can tell me for sure what it is, or if I can at least match it. I would be good with mahogany. A good, strong mahogany would be more than sufficient for the boom itself. Well, happy Tuesday afternoon. I popped on by the boat here just to bring a small piece of scrap wood and test it into that boom cut I made where we're going to scarf in a new piece. The idea was to use just cheap wood. I just use an old piece of 2x4 to cut a template piece out before I go ahead and use the expensive mahogany that I purchased to put in this for the scarf joint. Let's take a look and see how it fits. Looks pretty good, and I'll use this as a template for cutting the teak. Well, after dry fitting that piece of 2x4 down in the boom, I know that that's the right size. It was just slightly narrower than it should be, so I'm going to make this a little wider, and then any trim I have to do, I'll do inside the boom with a chisel. So let's go ahead and cut this nice mahogany on the bandsaw. And you saw me the other day complaining about how messy my shop is, and you'll kind of see what I mean. All right, I've got my small template here. This is that small piece of 2x4 I had cut as a template. I also have my good thick 8/4 piece of mahogany. Again, 8/4, you recall, is a full 2 inches thick. And unlike when you buy 1 inch board, a lot of times what you get is 3/4 inch thick. If you buy 8/4, you're getting 2 full inches thickness on this. And it's usually fairly rough cut. You'll have to plane or sand it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as a template. So I'm going to cut this to the size I need, and then I'm going to turn around and I'm actually going to cut it thinner because I don't need a full 8/4 thickness here. I'm okay going a little wider than this. I'd rather trim it with sanding than get it wrong. We got a nice cut here, and we're going to go ahead and make our cut on this side now. Now my thickness on this needs to be 1 1/4. I'm going to use the fence for this. Double check, it is. My fence locked in, I'm just going to apply pressure one direction and then cut with the other. Okay, so you can see here we've gone ahead and cut this on the inside, and what that means is here is my piece right here. I'll lay right down in it. Again, we wanted the grain going the same way. It looks good there. So I've got my table set here at a 90-degree angle, and we're just going to go ahead and get started with this. This sucks the juice down a little bit, so let's see what we got going here. All right, so here's what we have. We're fairly smooth here. Again, this is going to be the side that's going to go down inside the mast, so it doesn't need to be perfect. We got these sides nice and smooth, and I exaggerated here, but I beveled them a little bit like this, just so that this will fit in there nice and tight. Same with on this side, and then I smoothed down this side here. I'm going to do a little bit more on this one, though I'm not going to go too much, because what I really want to do is shape this to the round. So when this is embedded in the mast, it's going to have a little bit of a rounded shape to it, and that'll give me the ability to use the palm sander and sand that down into shape I ultimately want. All in all, I'm really pleased. I used my small piece of 2x4 scrap as a test, dry fit test. I then cut my piece of mahogany to the size I wanted. I split it down the middle, and then I went ahead and sanded this on the belt sander to get it nice and smooth. This is going to become the plug that's going to sit down inside of the boom, and we'll sand the whole thing top. So let's stop it here. We'll head down to the boat. We'll dry fit this one more time carefully. I don't want to pound it in so far I can't pry it back out. But we'll dry fit this, and then once we know it fits really well, we'll come back with some thickened epoxy, tap it in with a rubber mallet, clamp it, let it dry, and then we'll sand and shape it. That's going to be a good scarfed edge for a nice wooden boom. Well, with that, off we go. So I'm just dry fitting this, and I've got my sander here. I'm going to be sanding just a little bit at a time so I get a nice good tight fit. You can see it's close, but not quite there. So yes, what I've done here is I made this a little bit big. I came in here and I've been sanding it down, and essentially I'm making sure it fits real good just by laying it in. You'll notice I marked a little arrow on the bottom side that points forward. That way I knew what my orientation was each time I put it in and took it out. The good news is a nice tight fit, gives me a little tiny gap around it so that the epoxy will ooze up around it and seal not only along the bottom areas, but also up around the side. So I'm leaving just a small amount of wood exposed on the top. I'm okay if a little bit of it gets on the wood. You can always sand that up if I need to, but I don't want to have a lot of it covering this wood or gooping down the side. So this gives me a nice clean area to work with. There we go. I'm not going to bother putting any on here because the reality is once this sits down in here, I'm going to have to sand a lot of this off anyway. I also went ahead and saved a bunch of the sawdust. So when I get done with this, as I sand it down, I will fill this little gap a little bit with sawdust. What I'm going to do is just get a little bit of it smeared down on the wood. Normally I would use a brush for this, but I didn't bring one up, and I don't want to go back down and chance this starting to pot up a little bit. But the reason I'm doing this is just to get a small moist coat, at least on the majority of the wood where the adhesion is going to take place. I'm using 405, which is an adhesive blend. So it'll be a little thicker, a little lighter than like a fairing look would be, but it'll give me a nice thick and strong bond. Got that on fairly thick, which is good. And now it's just a matter of popping this piece down, and I'm going to double check my arrow, make sure I have it going in the right spot. And I do. My hammer and give it a tap. Now I saved just this small amount of epoxy, and I mixed it with the teak sawdust. And what I want to do is, I'm going to have a little tiny gap over here. I want to use this to fill right inside of that gap. That way my color will match better. It's a nice little cheating trick, but it works pretty well. So now, because we use thickened epoxy, what we can do is essentially just take this and peel it right on up. Because this is epoxy, I could actually start sanding this in an hour to 2 hours and it would be good and hard. I thought about cheating a little bit. My thought was, boy, if I sanded that just before it was completely cured, the sawdust and the epoxy would sort of blend in together and make a nice, good look to it. The good news is I don't think it's going to look too bad with this sawdust I added to it already, and I'd rather do that and come back and sand it after it's cured rather than chance vibrating it around and having some of the epoxy settle out of the cracks. So this is going to be a good repair. We'll let this sit overnight, and we'll come back and we'll get this sanded. Essentially just sand it smooth with the rest of the boom, and it'll look like good as new. In case you're interested, this is my oh-so-technical way of capturing sawdust. I have the exhaust port on the sander, and what I basically do is stick the little exhaust port hose right in here, take an elastic, put it around it, and let it all capture into the sock. It will blow up and the really fine dust comes out, but the heavier pieces of sawdust stay in it. So just to give you an idea, I've already emptied this. There's not a lot in there, but you can kind of see what we end up with here is this brown dust. That's exactly what we want to color our glue or our epoxy. So, there you go. We always lose one sock in the dryer anyway. There's your solution. Hey everybody, it's 2 days later after I've epoxied this piece down into the mast. We were expecting some pretty heavy rains, and while this is under the roof, there's an exposed area behind me, so I wrapped this up in plastic. Let's get this unwrapped and take a look. We've got this in here. Looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and start sanding this down, and I'm going to be using a very low grit. I think I have 80 grit on it. I got it in the boom a little bit here, so I'm going to use my lighter grits and get that smoothed out. I've done 80 grit. We'll jump in here with 120 now. There's the final scarf job, and again, it's exactly what we wanted to see from a solid standpoint. The joints look good. You can see how nice and small they are around the edge. You might want to think you want to get rid of the entire epoxy line, but you want a little bit there. You certainly want to make sure epoxy has bonded those two together. There's a section over here where the line is so thin. What that means is that wood is just about wood against wood, very little room for any epoxy adhesion between the two. This right here is going to be a good, solid repair that will last for many, many, many years. And that is essentially how you repair a wooden structure. You can scarf wood into a bulkhead or a beam